Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Arrington. My moniker is Mark the Mortgage Marine, and I'm joined here today in this podcast with Jeremy Thrane, who is another fellow Marine. So welcome. Thank you for being over here.
Thank you for having me.
Just a little bit of background about myself for those that haven't seen this before. I'm a retired Marine. I got out as a Master Sergeant. I think you retired as a Master Sergeant. I think we actually retired at the same day formally. I got out of the Special Operations Command last year, and I think chose the road less traveled by, and I got into mortgage financing. Most people with my background end up going to work for a letter agency or, continue to serve overseas in a different type of capacity. But I thought that I was taking the road less traveled by to get into mortgage financing, and I generally, found a new passion for helping military service members and veterans establish their home base, if you will, and how to actually utilize their VA loan, and not only to utilize their VA loan for obviously shelter, but how to utilize their VA loan in order to set up like a financial solid foundation for their future going forward. And, just my patriotic aspects of it is, essentially in the Constitution, it talks about the pursuit of happiness. And really what I think the pursuit of happiness is home ownership. That's something that we have in this country that we can have. And I know that you've served overseas quite a bit. That's not something everybody else gets to do, right? We actually get to own our property. Obviously, you pay taxes on it, whatever else. But it's a right that we as Americans have, which I think is pretty profound and awesome. So I get to help out military service members and just the greater community in order to own a home. So tell me a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and why you do what you do.
Well, I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, to a Navy man. My parents moved to the Midwest, and that's where I did most of my growing up, and then closely connected to the military through my whole family, which is kind of what drove me in that direction. Did about 26 years as a combat engineer. That was my primary MOS. Like any Marine, got a myriad of other MOSs on top of that. And through that process, learned some things in being a home buyer. Went into construction and learned a lot there. And then just through the years, kind of developed a certain kind of uninformed in certain aspects attitude toward real estate and the way that venture always plays out. And so as time went by, I'm kind of a tree shaker. So as time went by, I kind of gained this desire to want to become a real estate agent and do something better or in a fashion that is better than any other person has done it before. But I wanted to focus that toward veterans, active duty, retired, those type of things, and help them because I'm familiar with what they go through. I'm familiar with what they see on their side in regards to real estate and real estate agents. And then my expertise in carpentry, doing that for well over a decade, really landed me in a direction that I wanted to do this and I wanted to do it better, and I wanted to ultimately, I'd like to change the industry and go with that at the same mentality that we have in the military, that you can't change the big picture overnight. You got to start with the small, right? That fire team. If you change and positively affect what's around you immediately, it will grow, and you can change things in the long term that way. So my goal is to make this a better system for veterans specifically. That's my direct focus. Obviously, other people, as time goes by, will have focus in other directions as well.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting that me and you never served together, right? But that exact saying, like, hey, you can't change the Marine Corps from back in our service time, but you can change your corner of it. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to do in the mortgage industry as well, right? And I think it's that typical, like, Marine perfectionist kind of attitude, like, hey, you can always have done a little bit better, right? Which is, to me, a positive thing. Obviously, some people look at perfectionism as a negative, but I think it's a positive because at the end of the day, like, if you have a level of self-reflection, you can always get a little better, right? I could have, said that a little bit better or whatever else. So that's awesome that you're kind of bringing that type of mentality into real estate. I think it's somewhat lacking. I know when I got into, the real estate industry as a loan officer, I've worked with a lot of people, right? And there's just some people that you're like, cool, like, I'm happy to work with you once or twice, but other than that, I'm not necessarily going to pursue it because you may or may not have the interest of the veteran at your top priority. And that's always going to be mine. At the end of the day, I've told people straight up, like, hey, man, either I can't beat their rate or so on and so forth. They have a special product that's only applicable to you or whatever else. And I've told people to go to other people before because it's ultimately better for them and their family. And that's just kind of, I don't know, I would say it's probably that just kind of holistic type of mentality when it comes to taking care of our own. And I've been out now for a while, but at the end of the day, my tribe is, service members. My tribe is Marine. And I know that at the Veterans Business Collective meetings, when we talk, right, that's one of the first things that we talk about in those meetings is like, what tribe do you come from? And, we can kind of get off on a dichotomy about tribalism and, whatever else later. But, generally, I think that it's pretty awesome as far as your, background in construction. And how did that background in construction, do you think it's helped you today as a realtor when you like kind of walk into a place?
Well, so between the construction, and I also went through the certification courses for home inspector.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two different mentalities there. As a construction guy that used to build homes, framing construction, all that, you really understand what good craftsmanship is
Mm-hmm.
and what not so great craftsmanship is. What everybody calls the ticky-tacky cookie cutter homes that you see pop up these days. And those aren't always bad construction, but they're not high quality craftsmanship. So you definitely see those things when you walk into a home, and it aids you in the ability to tell your buyer what the value of that home is
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, and what the life expectancy and the problems that are going to be come down the road as the home gets older. With the home inspection, it's an entirely different focus because you're looking at what's already wrong or what may already be wrong
Mm-hmm.
in the home. And the easy example is, oh, there's a water stain in the corner up there. So that doesn't tell you that there's a stain there that needs to be painted. It tells you that there's something that caused it, and those things are leaks, right? It could be, depending on where it's at in the house, it could be a pipe. If it's on the top floor, directly, with a vaulted ceiling, it's a roof problem, right? So those things help to identify those. And it, again, better informs the buyer what they're getting into on day one, that when they move into that house, they may have to consider repairs, depending on whether or not they can get them worked in the deal
Mm-hmm.
for the purchase. But if they can't, at least they know what money's going to have to be spent up front to make that home in good condition, or back to its, or as close as you get it to its original state. So that is not something that every realtor has, obviously, and I feel it's one of the big assets that I bring. Um, but it also brings liability, that if I make a factual statement to somebody, they can hold me liable to that statement. But at the same time, I feel that I would rather bring value to the conversation than conjecture.
And I think that's just an overarching issue with our industry is that, essentially I think the lawyers have just kind of taken control of everything, and everything is so, CYA, cover your ass with every single thing that you do. Like to an extent where, this is our opinion. We have to state that this is our opinion, and everything that we talk about, it's on your own volition if you take it or not. But it's kind of hard because at the end of the day, like, you are talking to veterans, and I know that they go kind of that Marine to Marine, point to point, like, hey man, tell me what's up, right? And I always have to kind of layer it with ultimately this is your decision, right? You know what I mean? And it's a really weird tight rope that we have to walk when it comes to actually giving our opinions on the matter. And I'm kind of, I don't really believe in that. For at the end of the day, like, you're talking to me because I have experience in it, like you, for instance. If you're my realtor and you looked at a home inspection, I knew you had 10 years of, construction experience, I'm gonna be like, hey man, what do you think? You know what I mean? Obviously, like, if it's like, cool man, I assume you're not throwing out dollar signs for most things. If you're like, hey, get an estimate from another contractor that's licensed. But it says something that, like, we have to somewhat like CYA when it comes to actually giving our opinion on things that we're experienced in.
Right. So I always believe the relationship is a big thing, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
build a good, strong, positive relationship with the clientele, and you in turn build a friendship, it's not
Oh
just
yeah.
people that walk in your door that are going to make money. The money comes later. if you build those relationships and those friendships, at the end of the day, I'm also willing, and I've told every one of my clients, that's not a big problem. At the end of the day, it shouldn't stop you from purchasing this home. And I always offer, because of my construction experience, I tell them I'm always willing to come over for a 6-pack and a hammer, and I'll get up there and help you fix it. And then it saves them money, and it also strengthens that relationship. I know you know Austin Frost a little bit. He just purchased a house through me, and I've got plans to go over and help him put his fence up, and then fix some of the small things in the structure, and work with him so that he's got a good home at the end of the day, which he already does. But like any home that's not brand new, so he's got some small issues.
Yeah, little tweaks.
And that's the thing. And I get to teach him so that he's a more self-reliant person also. And I offer that to every one of my clients.
Yeah, it's the whole like teach a man to fish kind of parable, for instance. Yeah, man. And I think at the end of the day, when you close on a transaction, everybody's happy, everything goes smoothly, and then you add that little bit extra value. It's like, oh, and by the way, dude, I'm actually going to kind of give you a little bit of guidance, marine to marine, outside of real estate, obviously. I mean, that definitely shows more of who you are, that you're just not like a transactional human being.
Try to let them understand that the relationship doesn't end on closing day.
Right.
The relationship continues past that point, and I'll always be that advisor for them in the realm of real estate.
Yeah, and I mean, to an extent where, I mean, obviously outside of the mortgage aspects of things, I mean, I talk to them about their VA disability and everything else. I talk about, like, what are you doing in the Marine Corps and everything else. Like, to me, it's like, especially when you're dealing with like a junior Marine, like Lance Corporal's first time home buyer and everything else, like, if I can give them as much knowledge as I can so that they're ultimately more successful in the future, then why wouldn't you, right?
Right.
Like it's just simple like leadership 101. It's just don't forget it. You know what I mean? Like
it's always the leadership in us. It's always going to be in us to mentor and guide and drive people in a positive direction. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's talk about some things or whatever else. And obviously, some of that has to deal with mortgages, right? And then some of it just has to deal with life sometimes. Because I mean, I don't know. I've had guys call me up after we've completed deals and everything else, and they're asking me about like just completely different things, and I'm like, okay, cool. Like turn back on the Marine hat at this point, and kind of give them some life guidance whenever they ask for it. And transitioning a little bit to our next kind of topic that we want to talk about, PCS season is upon us. A lot of people don't quite understand that as far as like, the civilian population, as far as what it actually means to have a permanent change of station and some of the intricacies that go into that. But if you want to kind of expound upon, what is PCS season, especially when it comes to the Marine Corps, and then some of your trials and tribulations that you've experienced through PCSing, because I think you said you had 7.
I believe that's what it was, yes.
Yeah, I think I had 7, 7-ish as well. I'd have to count them on my hands and toes again, Marine Corps math. Yeah, man. So tell me a little bit about your experience with PCS season and about how you help people that are inbound to the Camp Lejeune area.
Well, PCS season is definitely a vastly different experience based on your rank and where you are at in life. As a young Marine, it was very easy, right? You throw a few things in a sea bag, throw them in the back of your Chevy Colorado or your Ford Ranger and truck across country, right? And then you get a nice payday at the end of the day because you did everything yourself.
I used to lay out a blanket, and then I would tie all my stuff inside the blanket and throw it over my... That was gone. That's all I needed.
And then as you get a little older and you start growing roots and a family, it gets more and more difficult every time, right? So I was married by the time I was a sergeant, and the kids started coming and
complexity.
Right, and the flexibility it gets about the same.
Flexibility decreases, complexity increases.
Right. And so you find yourself, the first time's a real struggle, right? Because then you find out there's so much planning into going to it, and then you miss almost everything, right? So you get all your stuff packed and you get it over to DMO and out the door, and you're like 2 days before you got to go, and you're like, I didn't clean this house. Now what do I do? Now you got to hire cleaners to come in, people to shampoo the carpet. But as time went by, my last PCS from Camp Pendleton to Lejeune, I had all that squared down. And that's one of the great things about using a veteran realtor is that they've had that experience and they know to give you those kind of guidances, right? So on my last PCS move, I did 3 DMO moves. I did one where they came and cleaned out the house and decluttered everything. So they took everything we didn't need for the next 6 months. They came 90 days out and took everything down to the bare minimum that we could survive without. Mm-hmm. And then on just 5 days prior to actually having to drive cross country, they removed everything from garden tools to my wood shop and all that. And we were down to, an air mattress for a couple days. And we spent those 5 days cleaning, Marine Corps style, minus the Fabuloso. And scrubbed from ceiling to floor and prepped everything. And then when we stepped out, had a professional painter / brother-in-law come in and repaint all the walls down to pure white. I normally don't recommend repainting, but our wall, we lived in that home for 14 years.
Yeah.
So
the value is going to go up.
Let me rephrase that.
A little bit of paint, the value is going to go up a little bit more.
So we had crazy colors and crazy patterns, so we had to paint. But usually, if you have muted tones on your wall, all you need to do is a little bit of patch repair most of the time. But yeah, so those experiences through the year, you get a client that's like, yeah, we're getting ready to move from Camp Pendleton. I'm a sergeant, I'm married, and you're like, things are about to get very interesting for you. And then when you get over here, the worst part is you still have to be a Marine, right? So you're lucky enough that you get 8 days to move cross country, and then you get a whole whopping 10 days to find a home and try and move in. And it never works that way.
Yeah.
So knowing those things and being able to prepare them, like, listen, the journey begins for the first 10 days, but it's going to have to continue after that because the likelihood of you finding a home in 10 days that meets all your needs and your desires is minuscule, especially around here with the housing shortage.
Yeah, there's definitely a housing shortage around here. And then a lot of people don't understand, they have this conception that you can only have one VA loan at a time. So they tell themselves that, hey, I'm having a PCS from Camp Pendleton to Camp Lejeune. I have to sell my house. And a lot of times it's not necessarily going to be in their best benefit to sell their house, depending on how much it is and so on and so forth. But a lot of times you can rent that house out, especially if you got orders. And now you can have essentially 2 properties with a VA loan and essentially start establishing a pretty lucrative way of getting passive income through just your service through the military, because you get to utilize your VA loan over and over and over again with bonus entitlement, especially if you have PCS orders. So that's definitely something. It's like a common misconception that everybody kind of gets. Another thing that I've seen as far as PCSing goes, and I was working with a fellow Marine a while back, and we closed his loan and everything else, but essentially they were slow on some of the payments as far as his PCS move went. So he ended up putting everything on his own credit card, and then putting everything on his own credit card with the lack of payment, because it takes like 6 weeks sometimes to actually put in your claim once you get to your new duty station and everything else. It's an entire process, and it's not necessarily fast. Right. Especially during COVID, it was super slow.
And that's if S1 does their job smoothly.
Yeah. If lots of things have to line up, right? So essentially, he had solid like $12K worth on a credit card and everything else, which obviously doesn't look great for a mortgage application. And he was just waiting for these funds to come in because he was going to use some of those funds to cover some of his closing costs. And I mean, we just were waiting and waiting and waiting. He ended up, I think, getting some gifted funds from a family member in order to cover them. But at the end of the day, like, he was just at the behest of the Marine Corps to actually pay him out. And I mean, who knows how long that actually takes. So that's definitely something that they need to think about when they're going forward. And there's definitely some ways to kind of work that advantageously. And obviously, I mean, if anybody in the audience has any questions when it comes to that, just give me a call and we'll have a discussion about it.
Yeah, so that's what I love about you and some of the other lenders I have is when I start having those discussions, like the one I sent you the other day. They're moving cross state in that particular case, but everybody's situation is different, and getting ahead of the game is important, right? Everybody doesn't want to talk to a lender or real estate agent until they're on site,
right?
And that always creates stress.
Right.
It doesn't create anything that can't be solved. It just creates stress, and it creates additional obstacles. So one of the best things you can do is reach out, get some basic information on the area from a real estate advisor, and then find a local lender. Local lenders are so important. Just heard a story recently about somebody that used a lender that they hadn't heard of. It was a senior selling agent that was using that. I'm sorry, buyer agent that was using that lender. It turned out to be a giant scam. So you definitely want to. That's why you talk to a real estate advisor first, even though they can't do anything for you until you talk to a lender, but they
Right.
can give you guidance to lenders that they know and trust. And you know, personally, I vet everyone. I sit down and have a long conversation and make sure that morals and ethics are on the same sheet as far as the way we think in the process that we do. And that's very important for me because I don't ever want to send somebody to a lender I don't know or haven't
Yeah.
vetted for them. And so it's important for people to understand that, like, get ahead of the game, call 3, 4 months in advance. The worst that happens is you have conversations, and then when you get closer, you start toying with the credit.
Yeah.
But at least you know what you've got to do to get prepared.
I mean, the credit report's good for 120 days, right? So, I mean, like you got 4 months, and at the end of the day, the Marine Corps is not that fast about giving you orders,
Right.
unless you're like going to a specific program or something. But I mean, at the end of the day, like they want to say that they give you 6 months notice, but I mean, I've seen very short notices before.
I don't think I've ever had notice over 90 days.
I think I had a 3-weeker before in one of mine, and I think I was at a school at the time, and they were like, "Oh yeah, by the way, you're going to freaking Camp Lejeune." I'm like, "Oh really?" Like sweet. And then I had another one that was like, "Oh sweet, you're going to Afghanistan," and I was at airborne school at the time. I was like, "Oh really?" I was like, whatever. It happens, right? That's kind of what service members have to do, and I think a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people don't understand the fact that, like, listen, like you're gonna get literally a piece of paper and an email. And guess what it says? It says you're going to uproot your entire family and you're going to go serve your country as they see fit, because ultimately you are at the per needs of the Marine Corps. You know what I mean? Marine Corps needs you to move to Camp Lejeune. Like, you're moving to Camp Lejeune. There's no like ifs, ands, or buts about it, unless you want to deny orders, and then I guess you made your choice at that point. And then, you talked about complexity, and you talked about, some of these people that have like some of the larger families and everything else. I didn't necessarily have to deal with it because my kids are young. But, maybe you did. Like, what's it like having to kind of uproot from this middle school that you've been at with all your middle school homies? You know what I mean? And now you have to completely uproot and move. And that's why, working with somebody that kind of understands a little bit of that is very important, because if not, like, that's just not a big deal to them.
Basically, you're going to end up with an extra pet every time you have to uproot your kid from a school.
Is that how it works? It's like-
But it is. It's very heartbreaking to watch your little girl cry because everything she's ever known, every friend she's ever had, is going to be pulled away from her. So my little one was 9 years old when we moved out of Camp Pendleton. She's now almost 14. And it was hard because she was just old enough to really understand what that meant. So most of the connections she had in California, most of them are gone. Some of them are still there because her friends' parents were our friends. So we do still speak to some of them, but she now has a cousin, roughly a couple months younger than her, that she hasn't seen in 4 years now. And she has a new cousin that's already 4 years old that she has not met. And then her friends, she's seen them one time since we moved. So those things definitely, while they hurt, they also help to strengthen and build character as well.
Yeah.
They become more independent and self-reliant also. And
Yep.
I do see that in her because she already thinks she's independent of me. So
that should be fun for you. Yeah, mine. I got an 8-year-old daughter, and yeah, she's last week was fun. So yeah, she's being a little bit sassy pants about some stuff, but it is what it is. But I mean, that's just part of but that's why they deserve a higher level of service and understanding than probably they get on the average, right? And a lot of times they'll end up just going through like the local bank that they're already banking with, or whoever, name it, whatever company. And there's a lot of these huge multi-state companies that they end up going with, and they're just talking to some loan officer that's just some voice on the phone and just frankly like doesn't even know who they are or any of the stuff that they've actually been through, because a lot of those guys, they just want to cast a wide net, and if it works out, it works out, and if it doesn't, it just kind of doesn't. But ultimately, like, especially when you recommend somebody to me, like, I know that it's just not my reputation on the line, it's also your reputation on the line because you recommended me. So then, you have to just step up to bat, right? Like you have to perform, which, truth be told, I mean, you just have to do the right thing, right? It's a simple concept. Do the best that you humanly possibly can.
And that's absolutely a crayon sharpened on both ends, because if you refer somebody over to me to handle the real estate side of a transaction, it absolutely, it's the same thing. But that's why I vet everybody, and whether I've done one transaction, no transactions, or 100 transactions with somebody, it's always an evolving relationship. I've got about 4 veteran lenders that I would recommend, and I've only got 2 civilian ones. And I know you met one a couple weeks ago. The other one's clear over in Kansas, and was just pure happenstance by a stubborn client that ultimately it worked out for him, and it worked out for me. But phenomenal individual that's never been in the military himself.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and by no means it's like some sort of exceptionalism or anything else. It's just different. It's just a little bit different mentality, and sometimes mentalities kind of link up, especially if you're from the same tribe. But just to kind of wrap up, as far as PCS season goes and everything else, it's my opinion and recommendation that like your credit score is good for your credit report that I pull in. It's good for 120 days. So if you're within 120-day range, like go on and get an application in, figure out where your payment's at, if that aligns with what BAH, basic allowance for housing, is going to be, and then at least like kind of what your price point is, so that you don't go over there and you have like the awe syndrome of like, oh, I want that house. It's like, well, that house is going to cost you this much. You know what I mean? And then you kind of let down a little bit. But those are kind of my recommendations: is start the process early. And then obviously when you're talking to us, we can kind of help you out with dealing with some of the military stuff, because we've kind of done it. But what's your take on it?
Absolutely. You need to start that dialogue early. The second you receive orders, whether you're going to argue or fight them to go somewhere else, you definitely need to reach out and start opening that dialogue, because if you wait until the last minute, it will create additional obstacles, both on my side and your side, on top of all the other things that come into play. I would definitely say reach out to your command also right away and find out what their expectation is when you arrive, because I had a guy out in Fayetteville, known him a long time. He's got 7 kids. I'm sorry, 6. He arrived, and 20 days after he arrived, they sent him back to jump school because he hadn't been in the air for a couple of years and recerted. So he was, and then as soon as he got done with that, he's a newly promoted first sergeant. So he was off to the races for, learning how to knife hand people. And then, so his life for the last year, because he got here last year in, I believe it was April, it's been off to the races ever since, and he's just constantly. I hardly talk to him because he's so busy right now, getting snapped in as a command first sergeant.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, you don't have any time, and especially if you're in a leadership billet, like you honestly shouldn't have much time. All right, so kind of switching gears. Let's talk a little bit about transitioning, how your transition went, and then kind of any sort of techniques, tactics, and procedures that you could have for people that are kind of going through that right now. Not necessarily just real estate centric, but just holistically.
Transition out was actually fairly smooth for me. A lot of it was luck. Having people right in front of me that I've known for years give me advice on some of the things I need to do. But there were also a couple of things that got in touch with some recovery care coordinators that normally work with the Wounded Warrior Battalion, and had some conversations with them and found out. So they're a civilian company, and what they do is they actually they're contracted to help anyone. You just have to meet certain requirements that they have. And I think part of that's if you're not wounded, you got to be over 20 years. I don't remember the specifics, but having that coordinator, they're basically transition coordinators, and because they're civilians, they have a much wider range of things that they're familiar with and can recommend you to look into. They help me with the vocational rehabilitation, schooling, the skill bridge, all of those things, and moving into real estate, it's one of the things I found. Like, I went to SkillBridge, and SkillBridge said we can't do that because it's not a national license.
Can you
Now,
expound upon what SkillBridge is, in case people don't know about it?
SkillBridge is a cost-paid program that gets people into different courses and licensing. So the one that you always hear about is becoming a commercial truck driver, getting your CDL. That's the big one that you hear about all the time, and you usually have Marines in the units go out to, especially if you're part of an ESP. Everybody wants to be a truck driver when you drove a tram for 4 years. But they aid in gaining those technical skills. They've got a wide range of things. So immediately, if it's a national certification, welding, automotive, CDL, those type of things, SkillBridge absolutely does those 100% of the time. They just have their program. If you're still active duty, they actually TAD you to the program, and so that's your appointed place of duty
For like 6 months usually,
and
right?
it can be.
Up to 6 months.
It depends on what the program is. You can still use it after you're out. If you're a honorable discharge, they still allow you to use those programs. Your spouse can use it as well. And then there's VRE, which is basically the same thing, but they do it through a different set of funding, and they do it for people that are wounded and trying to rehabilitate for a different skill set as they transition out. All of those, the problem I was running into for real estate was, well, that's a state-by-state license, so we don't do that. Working with the recovery care coordinator, you could call it a workaround, but it was just kind of buried in both programs. It was both in the VRE and the SkillBridge. I ended up using the SkillBridge, or I'm sorry, the VRE, because I just paid for it out of pocket, and they told me we can reimburse you eventually. So that was the advantage of the VRE. And so once they figured it out, they got me paid for it. Where it paid off was other people through the recovery care coordination system have reached out to me and said, hey, I was given your number and I'm looking to become a real estate agent. And I said, okay. And now being much more educated with the VRE, I can help them there. And then we found out that SkillBridge does do it, just kind of buried in their program a little bit. So after we worked that out, now I have a connection in both of those directions. And of course, Joe, my recovery care coordinator, will send me people on occasion like, hey, here's what you got to do. And it becomes a much easier process for them. And I stay in touch with those people so that I know any updates to the process.
Yeah, so my transition, I think I've probably talked about it enough, but I used the Care Coalition internship program in order to, be able to essentially be a loan officer for some time before I actually formally retired. And it was just phenomenal. The Care Coalition through SOCOM is just great. They take care of us so much. And a lot of other people go through a program called the Honor Foundation, which is accessible to anybody that was attached to SOCOM, and they very much set you up for success. And there's also NC4 Vets, I think, is the name of the organization that kind of helps you out. And then we are a member of the organization, which is just the Veterans Business Collective, which is not associated to the military, but it's a veteran organization outside of the military where we have a focus on, providing a level of tribe and sense of belonging and camaraderie. But at the same time, it is a referral network that is ultimately going to help you if you are interested in building some sort of a business, entrepreneurship, or any sort of business aspect of things, which I highly recommend anybody that's transitioning out and or is just around the Wilmington or Jacksonville area to come check us out. And you can find us on veteransbusinesscollective.org or follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. And you're a member of the VBC as well, right?
Correct.
Yeah. What do you think about it?
I love it. When I first transitioned out, I met you almost immediately. I picked my license up And I think I met you within 2 days.
Yeah, pretty soon, yeah. Yeah.
And then we found out that we actually knew a couple people in the same circles
Mhm.
from my experiences in
Yeah.
Fallujah and what. But one, it's a great place to network. It's a, you know, those are people you're familiar with, the tribe, so to speak. But what I love about it is it's 1 month or 1 day every month. Come down to Wilmington or go up to Jacksonville. So technically 2 days a month. Um, get to be myself, speak the way I want to speak.
Yeah.
Uh, and I mean, like I
Lots of
have a
stuff.
good time.
Lots of stuff happens over
Um,
beer, right? You know what I mean? I'm just saying.
Right.
At the end of the day, like there's something about it where like, hey, everybody can kind of let their hair down a little bit. They don't have to get in this like ultra business mode where they have to
Right.
try to act like they're more polished than they actually are, right? And at the end of the day, like there's definitely a lot of business that happens there, but there's also a lot of help, right? Like especially the guys that are transitioning and thinking about getting out. Like I didn't know much about this industry, and if I would have, I was already committed to this when I joined the VBC. But at the end of the day, it would have been nice to go there, 6 months from retiring or whatever else, and be like, cool, man, what's this industry like? What's that industry like? And actually talk to a brother or sister. I say brother. It's for me, it's unisex, and get a little bit more information about it. And, as my transition through, I was able to participate in another program, which was Operation Healing Force, which is a SOCOM program where they actually kind of like take you and your wife essentially on a vacation, let you kind of de-stress a little bit before you kind of transition into civilian life, which was just phenomenal as well. Like there's just so many programs and so many things out there for veterans or service members that are about to become veterans. What is your take on the fact that some people just don't know about it, and like what type of mentality must that be? Is like because I feel like to me at least, it wasn't hard to find some of these programs.
Um, well, I mean, I stumbled upon you and then in turn the VBC as a
Mm,
result. And I definitely, I think what Chase has going with the VBC is phenomenal. Not just because of the networking, but because of the, as he calls it, the tribe
yeah,
gathering and being yourself, being allowed to be yourself um, is phenomenal. I'm starting to see it more up in the Jacksonville area. I watched that when I first went to the very first one. There was like 5 people, and I was like, "This is
yeah,
not a
slowly,
gathering.
slowly growing. Yeah,
This is the backyard barbecue,
yeah. The
right?"
campfire is there.
But
People will come.
last month, I think we had something like 25 or 30 people there in one shot, and it's gotten to the point now where DW, the one that runs it up there, has been looking for bigger and bigger venues.
Hmm.
Um, and so a little bit of a shameless plug, but I'm standing up the Post 556 for the American
Hmm.
Legion, and it's the same thing. You go around base and ask if people know about these organizations that are very prevalent in the community, and I've never heard of that. So it's our job to get that word out and let
Yeah.
people know that exists and that there is a place. Um, for we'll use the millennial term, safe place to come and be yourself
Yeah.
and talk to other people and have that opportunity to fit back into what you left behind. And I think that's been important in my experience, and it's led me to the American Legion through the VBC and put me on a focus as well. So those things are phenomenal, and I carry around VBC cards now and
Yeah,
hand them
I
out and
talked
tell
about, yeah.
people just come. You
Yeah.
don't have to pay when you first come.
Yeah. Active
Active
duty is free anyways.
Right. Same with the American Legion post we're standing up. It's going to be free for all active duty
Hmm.
members as well. But those are two things that go hand in hand. You don't have to pick one from the other. I'm doing both,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it just gives me more time with my tribe.
Yeah, the zero sum game mentality to me just is antiquated, right? Like it's not either you win or you lose. At the end of the day, like there's three options. If you
Right.
learned from it, did you really lose at the end of the day? So, you know, talking about transition and everything else, I think that kind of brings us into kind of our last and final point that we wanted to talk about. And it's just about, kind of sharing success stories. Unfortunately, I think that we've just got into, like I said, that zero sum game mentality where it's like, it's either good news or no news or whatever else, or bad news or whatever else. But it's either, it's a one or a zero. There's no like in between somehow. And I think that what we have found is that a lot of people have just shared so much bad stories that that's all kind of people think about, to the point where, like, the VA calls me, and one of the first things out of their mouths is they ask me if I've thought about suicide in the last, whatever time or whatever else. I'm like, you know what? Like, now that you mentioned it, now I'm thinking about it, right? Like, if it's like brought up and it's put in your face all the time, it becomes problematic. And trust me, I think that there's a lot of like help out there, and there's a lot of help needed. And I think a lot of the help that's needed is honestly just keeping up with your brothers and sisters that you serve with and giving them a call every now and then and saying, hey man, how are you doing? I'm going to do the Irreverent Warrior hike April 8th, which is a pretty cool concept that I haven't done one yet, but I'm excited about doing that. And then I have another one that the SEALs put on around the Hudson on August 19th, where we essentially link up with, our SEAL brethren, and we were going to go swim the damn Hudson. And it's a time that we get to go, everybody kind of gets to join in together and do something fun that's still tied back to our military service. What is your take on, maybe it's just so much just negativity around everything? And I also think that people's circles sometimes just get a little bit too small.
Yeah, I think there's been a hyper focus lately on the 22 action, the suicide prevention.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the focus, while it's good intention, I don't think it's in the right direction. I think there needs to be a better focus, and I think the VBC absolutely fulfills that.
Yeah.
You're giving people a place to go and be part, because you got to remember the things that cause that with veterans specifically is that loss of purpose, the loss of the tribe, the loss of direction, the suddenly whether you're young or not and feel like when you're leaving the military, I hate this place, nobody cares about me. You very quickly find out that in the military, everybody cares about you way more than you realize.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to the civilian world, you go to work for somebody, and you're like, yeah, they don't care if you're successful necessarily.
Right.
They don't care if you leave. They don't care if you stay. They don't, at the end of the day, as long as they're making money and
Profitable.
you're following their rules, then they'll keep you around. Whereas on the veteran side, if you're not following the rules or you're not making the cut, so to speak, there's mentorship and training and guidance that goes along, and you don't. So you very quickly realize you lost all that, and it hurts. It kind of tears your heart out that the rest of the world can't be like it is in the military with the care and the advocacy. That's it helps vastly.
Yeah, man. My 2 cents on the subject is this: share our strengths, not our weaknesses. I understand everybody has weaknesses. I have weaknesses, but at the end of the day, like when you're kind of in that type of mindset, man, just reach out to one of your brothers and just say, "Hey, man, how you doing?" And then that's a double-edged crayon, as you will, right? Marine Corpsism. That's the, hey, it's a back and forth, right? Like you just got to kind of check on each other, and that leadership and that caring, it just doesn't go away because you got out. Obviously, they're still focused on the military if they're still in or whatever else, or when they get out, people go other ways. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's freaking 2023. Pick up a phone, you can FaceTime, you can do whatever, and you set up things like, go do a hike together in Silkies and drink some freaking beer and have fun or whatever else. But definitely celebrate your strengths. And I think the more success stories that we have, through the VBC, through successful, like you're a successful realtor at this time, through those type of successes, I hope that we can kind of change the outlook of this wounded warrior thing that we got going on. It's like, to me, my saying is, it's like, veterans know what they can take. You know what I mean? Like, I know I can stay up for X amount of days. I know I can put heavy stuff on my back. I know I can deal with pain. Right? And a lot of people don't know that because they never had to go through those type of trials and tribulations. And I think that our veterans should take that as a strength and something as like a foundation thing to be able to move forward and understand that there is no such thing as, yesterday was my last good day, right? There's always a light. The sun's always going to rise tomorrow. And like call one of your brothers if you got some issues, man.
And it's keeping that positive mental attitude. Even when you feel like you don't want to have that positive mental, if you keep that positive mental attitude and keep pushing forward and find the positive aspects of things, it's definitely going to drive you towards success.
Well, I think that's all the time we have today. So I'm Mark Arrington, Mark the Mortgage Marine with Raider Home Loans powered by Movement Mortgage. If you need anything or you're PCSing into the area, please just give me a call and I'll give you as much guidance as I can.
And I'm JT, Jeremy Thrane, real estate advisor and professional with Realty One Group Affinity. And if you give me a call, we can just have a conversation and hopefully we'll get you pointed in the right direction.
All right, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Later.